To me, the ideal knife is the one that does the most of the things you need it to do the best. It's a cutting tool that's good for shaping wood, it's good for cleaning fish, and it's good for dressing game. Hey, it's Greg here with Outdoors on the Cheap, and today I'm going to talk about the classic bushcraft debate. Big knife, small knife, which is better? And which is the best knife? Okay, so this is sort of a never-ending, ongoing debate. If you want to polarize people on a Facebook group or whatever, some sort of social media, just bring up this debate, and people are going to come at it from different angles. And I mean, really what you're talking about is what's the best knife, and people don't define what that means, and what is a bushcraft knife and all that sort of stuff, right? So today I'm going to give you my opinion as a 49-year-old guy who spends a lot of time hunting and fishing and in the woods and that sort of stuff, doing multi-day camps overnight in the middle of nowhere with minimal gear, that sort of thing, for years. Okay, so I think the most annoying argument about this is when someone says the best knife is the one you have. That is a cop-out. That is a complete cop-out, because that doesn't answer the question. I mean, the question is, what tool? It is an easy argument to make that this does things this can't do, and this does things this can't do. Or to put it another way, this does some things well better than this. This does some things well better than that. Okay, so I can make either of those arguments. The question is, when you're in a bushcraft situation, a survival situation, what have you, basically, to me, that situation is you're in the woods, you went there for a day, you got lost, you have to make it for a night or two or three or whatever the situation has. Maybe you have to last a really long time, right? But basically, you've got, you know, a minimum set of tools. The knife is one of those tools, and you have to do it. You have to use that tool to do a lot of things to get by, to keep yourself fed, to keep yourself warm, to keep yourself hydrated, right? And to find shelter, right? So hopefully the knife isn't the only tool you have out in the woods, right? You should always have a knife and a folding saw, in my opinion, if you're going, you know, if there's any chance of being lost, or just to be careful anyway. It's nothing to put a folding saw in your back pocket and a knife around your neck, as I have here. But anyway, to get back to the point, to me, the ideal knife is the one that does the most of the things you need it to do the best. Okay, and in the sense of bushcraft survival, right, that is to say, it is a cutting tool that's good at shaping wood, right? The wood is the main raw material you find out in the forest. There's a reason they call it the woods, right? For shaping the wood into whatever implement you need to affect a survival solution you're trying to affect. Okay, so it's a cutting tool, knife cuts. It's a cutting tool that's good for shaping wood, it's good for cleaning fish, and it's good for dressing game. For me, it has to be good at all of those things. It has to be not clumsy, it has to be proficient at all of those things, okay? Because those are the main things you do. Those are the main things that knives do well. Okay, there's other things one might argue are important for a bushcraft tool to be able to do, like felling trees, chopping, splitting wood, and things like that. And those things can be done with a bushcraft knife, right? But for me, it's the shaping of wood, cleaning fish, dressing game, relatively finer tasks that I tend to be using my knife. I'm using my knife for those things 95% of the time when I'm out in the woods. This is a more versatile tool for shaping wood than this. And I'm using this as an example of a big knife. I know there's all kinds of people that are going to say, oh, my big knife is good for this, and my big... I'm saying all of them. Okay, all of them. This for shaping wood, for carving something, right? Putting a point on something. I can't see something big outperforming this for shaping wood, okay, for carving it. I've got a video where I basically make a canoe paddle with one of these, right? This is no better than this for doing that, okay? So for shaping wood, and when you're getting into the finer tasks, this is just better. right? If you're doing really broad things like we're doing, like a draw knife, you're drawing along the wood. This can be a little bit better, but this is fine. This works great for that. Okay, so for shaping wood, affecting it, you know, putting points on wood, making stakes, anything like that, feather sticks, etc., etc., etc. This is a better tool than this. For cleaning fish, this is an unbelievably clumsy tool compared to this. This has a nice point. You can get it in. You can get it in. You can get into the guts without piercing the guts. Basically, you can slice the belly without slicing the innards, right? So it's got a drop point like that, right? Got a nicely curved edge and a drop point. Okay, so the reason it has a drop point is so that you can get it through the guts, tilt it on an angle, and this little bend here glides along the guts without piercing them, while this part slices the belly, right? So you can gut your fish without opening up the intestines and making a hell of a mess of everything. Same thing for dressing game. This is a more agile knife than this. This is a clumsy knife for dressing out a deer. This is a much better knife for dressing out a deer. Right, when you're trying to dress out the deer, you've got basically like your hand in like this, right? And this hand's going along, sort of moving the innards out of the way, while this one's lifting up, and you can do it just fine. This nice point is better for dressing game. So for those three things, I find this to be better than this. And the width of this blade is only 4 fingers wide, about 4 inches, give or take, right? I don't find there's much to be gained going longer than this. And there is a point where if you get smaller, it does become less useful, right? I would say 3 fingers would be a minimum, but I over time, I tried everything. Every year I go out, you know, when I was trying to figure all this stuff out, when I was doing my rabbit snaring, bring a different knife every year and use it for everything. You're basically taking down wrist thick trees, you're putting points onto things, you're taking branches off of trees, you're dressing out a rabbit, which is relatively fine game, you know, without spoiling the meat, right? So you're dressing game, you're processing wood, using different knives. And I've used big heavy things like this, and things like this. I prefer this. This will do all the things I need for that, better than this. Okay, so where these things come in, where these are better than things like this, these are better for limbing trees. If you've got a small tree and you want to take the branches off of it, I'm talking a smaller tree, like a Christmas tree, right? This has more heft. It's good for that. For things like batoning, not this knife in particular, because this isn't even a full tang knife. But if you have a big beefy knife, it's a full tang knife. It's got the heft, it's got the strength. If it's got the good quality steel and the proper grind on it, it's going to outperform this for being batoned, right? If you're trying to split wood, the longer blade is handier for splitting wood than the shorter blade. When you're in a real forest where there's no people around, an actual wilderness, okay, there's dead trees everywhere, and there's small branches and thicker branches and thicker branches. There's dead trees that you can smash open and use for whatever you need them for, right? There's dead trees lying around all over the place. Here, let's grab the camera and show you. Here, I'm in a wilderness area here, okay? Nobody lives here, nobody hikes here. I never see anybody back here ever, ever, ever. Because of that, the resources are everywhere, right? Right? I mean, on the ground, there's, you know, thin sort of good fire starting. If there's been a rain, then you get a bit more resourceful, right? If there's been a good rain, you go into the thicker woods, right, under some tree cover. You start snapping off this thin. Here how dry that is. It was just raining the other day, right? That's all dry. This is all perfectly good fire starting material. And look, there's all kinds of it everywhere, because I'm not in a campground. I'm not in my mother's backyard, right? I'm in an actual forest with you know, nature and wilderness. The trees have there's dead branches everywhere. I do not need splitting and batoning and all that stuff to get the materials I need to light a fire. Even if it's been raining like crazy, it's not necessary. I just heard a deer. Just heard a deer barking. Anyway, even if it's been raining like crazy, I don't need to do it. I mean, one of the big arguments they make for batoning is, well, what if it's raining and you have to get into wood to you know, to make a fire? You go into the thicker woods, you're always going to find stuff like this. It's like paper, right? You can get into that with a knife, no problem, just prying off the outer bits, right? And there's dead trees that you can knock down, smash open, and just bash, like by clubbing basically, to get into it. And you get into a lot quicker than you free around with your knife, using your knife like a wedge or a chisel or whatever. This past winter, I came out here after a big snowstorm. I simulated the situation where you went out for an afternoon and you got lost and the sun was setting and you had to make a shelter really quick. And so I threw this together just by pushing over dead trees and picking things up off the ground, right? I found wood I could use to burn. I stood it up here just to dry it out for, I don't know, next winter or whatever. That's just hardwired activity, right? If you leave the wood on the ground, it gets rained on. You stand it up, it gets drier. But basically, I've got wood, just like dead trees that were lying down, right? There's so many of them lying around, right? Those made the bulk of the structure. The trees I found for fire are the ones I pushed over that were dead standing. Right, you got to remember that a forest is in a constant state of growth and decline, right? So there's trees that are new, there's trees that are old, and there's trees that are dead, and they're all over the place. You walk around a bit, you can find them. There's a birch tree over there, there's another birch tree over there, right? Another birch tree over there, right? So I mean, there's birch trees around. That's great fire starting stuff. I see another dead standing spruce over there, right? When you're in a real survival situation in a real forest, there's a lot of resources around. If you stay in that location day after day after day, you start exhausting the handy resources and have to move further afoot, right? But if you're taking one of these survival courses on a piece of land that the instructor owns, that's already been scoured over for raw materials. So it's a different situation than being in a real wilderness where you're not really, no one is looking for the materials you're looking for. Everything's just there. Okay, so, you know, I'm not saying it's impossible to find yourself in a situation where for some reason there's only one tree in the woods that's dry, that you can't push over, that you have to take down with a knife. I suppose that's possible, but I just can't see it happening. If you're in an actual forest, there's trees all over the place, and some of them are dead, and some of them can be pushed over by hand. So, you know, you're just not going to have to go batoning trees to make firewood. For that matter, the best trees for firewood are the dead ones anyway, because they've dried out, right? Live green trees are terrible firewood. So, you know, it just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I came out here and made this shelter with no knife, no axe, no nothing, just pushing things over using my bare hands basically. And then I made a fire big enough to warm the shelter. Again, no axe, no batoning, none of that stuff, right? I even, you can look back, I'll put these up at the end, but I even had thermometers set up in here. And I showed that on a really cold day, I had it 20, I was sitting right there and it was 20 Celsius. I had a thermometer sitting right here and I showed that the air was 20 Celsius. Okay, so all of that without, and that was in the winter. It wasn't the coldest day in the year, of course. You know, I wanted to come out and do something like that at minus 20 Celsius. That's about as cold it gets here. But it was cold, it was warmer than that. I think it was like -5 that day, something like that, -5 Celsius. Not a super cold day. But anyway, to go from -5 to 20 Celsius and be able to sit there with a t-shirt on is pretty nice, right? And to do all of that without an axe or a saw, or without having to baton a knife, is just proof of concept, in my opinion. Now, some of you might be noticing that the knife I'm holding in my hand is a Mora knife, okay? Frost, Mora, Sweden, okay? And this is not a full tang knife. So some of you are going to say, that's not a full tang knife. You don't know what you're talking about. Bushcraft knife, a survival knife, has to be a full tang knife. And in principle, technically I agree with you, okay? I'm speaking to this knife because I've had this for years. And this is the configuration, the shape, to me, of an ideal knife. A nice relatively continuous curve, pointy at the end, not round like a lot of these survival knives that are fat and round at the end. You know, good luck trying to gut at a fish with that. Good luck having to do anything that requires a point. But if you need to put a hole in a piece of wood, you know, right, you use your point like that and you make a square to get the hole into it, right? If you've got some really, like this one here, you got some blunt thing at the end, suppose it can work, right? But I mean, this is purpose built, right? Anyway, I'm holding this up because I've had it for years. I've used it for years. It's never given up on me, and I've batoned it. I've done just about everything you can to it, but it is not 100% reliable because it has a rat tail tang inside this plastic handle. But it's this shape that I like. If you can find a full tang knife like this, you've got it. And I've got one here. I bought this from a company called BPS Knives. I don't even know if they exist anymore because they're in the Ukraine. Anyway, this is basically fashioned after the Mora knife. It's very similar, although in my opinion I think they actually improved on it. You can see the curve of this is more continuous. This Mora here, it's relatively flat from here to here, and then you've got a curve here. With this knife, it has a really continuous sweep of a curve. It's also a bit thicker. It's got a bit more heft. You can see the steel here, the actual width of the blade. It's a bit more to it. Right? It's the same length. They're very similar in design. This has everything I like in a knife, and a little bit more. It's full tang. It's got a little bit more heft, right? Anything like this. I'm not giving BPS Knives a plug or anything. I have no relationship with them at all. What I'm trying to say is that anything like this is all the knife you need for 99.999% of bushcrafting situations. I even saw some really, high subscription, very popular knife review guy talk about this thing, saying it was for children and women. What a ridiculous thing to say. I don't even know what that means. I mean, this knife fits my hand. I'm 6'4". I got a big hand. Fits my hand perfectly, right? I carved a canoe paddle with this knife. Right? If it really wasn't up to bushcrafting, I think that wouldn't have worked out so well. Right? I think that guy's a bit more of a knife salesman than anything else. Finally, one of the things people say about the big knife is self-defense, fighting, defending yourself against, I guess, people or wild animals. That's probably the most, in my opinion, that's probably the most ridiculous of all the reasons to have a big knife. I think part of the problem with this whole area of debate is that a lot of the discussion is driven by people with military backgrounds. A lot of popular survival instructors, a lot of charismatic survival instructors, they tend to have a military background. People tend to respect people with a military background. They have survival training, right? And sure, I'm not going to knock them for that. But military people have a certain take on things, right? They're trained to fight, right? They're in tactical combat situations. They're not going to bring a knife in the woods. They're not going to bring a knife with them in a military context that can't double as a good weapon. And this is a better weapon than this any day of the week. Right? Two guys go at each other, equal skills. The guy with this one's probably gonna come out on top, right? And the more menacing and longer bladed and more badass looking the knife is, probably the more of an advantage the guy's gonna have. And a lot of the so-called survival knives I see people talking about, pitching, taking little pictures and posting on Instagram and all that sort of stuff, they basically look like menacing weapons. They don't look like fine tools with a nice point, with a nice continuous curve, with a nice square back for making sparks, ideal for gutting fish, dressing game, shaping wood. They look like something that you would brandish to scare another person. And I honestly think that a lot of these people, they like to have a big knife in the woods because it makes them feel safer. It's almost like a pacifier for big tough guys that are afraid of things. And I don't want to offend anyone when I'm saying that, but I was a 20-year-old male. I was a teenager. I was a 20-year-old male. I was a 30-year-old male. I was a 40-year-old male. And guess what? The older I get, the reason I have these big knives is because I got them when I was in my 20s, right? And the older I get, the smaller the knives get, because I just find these are better for everything I need knives for, and these aren't, right? I bought these because I just thought, oh, it's cool. Look, yeah, right? These are not as useful as these. They are better fighting knives. Not necessarily. This actually is a World War II Soul engine knife, I believe. I got this in a yard sale for next to nothing because it had no handle. So this is like, technically a combat knife of some kind, right? And we all watch the Rambo movies and his big ass combat knife and all that sort of stuff, right? But I have never been in a situation in my life in the woods where I needed to use a knife to fend for my life, right? Number one, I never meet people when I'm in the woods. Never. I'm in an actual wilderness where there's no people. Number two, all of the animals that are dangerous for you. I put it another way. Any animal that's badass enough to say, hey, today I'm going to kill a human and eat that human, right? Any animal that has that in him, in her, in it, you're probably not going to see it coming, right? It's going to ambush you. It's going to attack you in your sleep. That sort of thing. I mean, think about an apex predator. For me, we're in Nova Scotia where I live, the apex predator is black bear, right? I guess technically the second would be the coy dog we have. It's basically like, it's a coyote, but it's bigger than a typical coyote. It's part wolf, right? I guess if you had a really aggressive, extra big, motivated coyote, you could kill a man. Every once, there's been a couple cases where they've killed people here, but it's extremely rare. Generally speaking, the black bears are afraid of people. The coyotes are afraid of people. There's rumors that we have cougars here, eastern cougar. No definitive proof of that. The debate rages on, but whether it's a cougar or a coy dog, coyote, or a black bear, my guess is that if they decide one day that they think you are meat and they want to eat you, you are not going to see it coming, right? They're going to ambush you, or they're going to take you in your sleep, because these things see, they don't mind hunting in the dark. They don't mind hunting at night. They can be totally nocturnal. They're not bothered by any of that. Also, by the way, they kill things for a living, right? They kill all the time, right? They kill things almost every day, or often, right? They're really good at killing stuff with their teeth and their claws. How good are you at fighting with a knife, really? And then you say, oh, I took training. I went to this school. Have you ever fought a cougar with a knife? I mean, do you even know what you're getting yourself into? Imagine Mike Tyson times 1,000, right? I mean, do you have any idea of the kind of speed and reflexes and power a wild animal has compared to you, right? A relatively defensive human, useless fingernails, useless teeth, great brain, right? But not the greatest reflexes. We don't get by on our reflexes. We get by on our intellect, right? So even if the scenario in the movies happens, where you're walking down the trail and you look up, and there's a bear, and the bear looks at you, and then it stands up on its hind, and there's a confrontation, and then the bear comes at you, let's say. Usually they run away. If you're smart, you make yourself big, and most animals are afraid of people and they run away because you're an apex predator, right? That's what I always bank on. I bank on the assumption that everything out here is afraid of me, and I've never been wrong. Right? If I ever am wrong, that'll be the end of Greg, and I'll be meat. But even if, let's say, you're in that situation in the movies where you see the thing, it looks at you, there's a little bit of a sizing up on one another, and the bear says, okay, let's do it. The bear comes at you. And even if you're able to, so the bear's coming at you, it's right over, you give it a really good thrust straight to the heart, or wherever you think the heart is. I don't even think this would actually puncture as well as this, because this is more stabby than this, to tell you the truth. This would probably be better for slashing because it's got more weight. Anyway, let's say I got a perfect shot in. I don't think that's going to save my life anyway. Right? I think whatever that deep bear does to me while I'm trying to kill it, it's going to be so lethal, it's not going to matter whether or not I kill it. Because there's going to be nothing left of me, right? The chances of me surviving that, if I survive the bear attack or the cougar attack or the coyote attack or whatever it is, if I survive it, I don't know if it's because of the way I fought or the thing just decided not to kill me that day, right? But I mean, to choose your main knife, I usually have a good knife and a pocket knife. A pocket knife is my backup, and this here is my main knife, to make the decision on what the main knife should be based on the fact that you think it'd be really good for a knife fight, I think that's ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense at all. You're not going to get in a knife fight in the woods unless you're going in a woods that's surrounded by a prison, and all the prisoners escape from the prison and they all have knives in their hands and they all want your stuff, right? I mean, think about the contingency, you know. I mean, knives are for fighting other people, right? Think about our ancestors, people that lived out in the forest and got by when the forest was a terrifying place with all kinds of predators beyond, you know, just predators that go above and beyond the predators we have nowadays, because there was more of them than us, right? We were the minority. We weren't the apex predator. Were those guys using knives to survive? They were using spears, right? And eventually they would have had bows and arrows, but even the guys that had bow and arrows would have had spears around. If you have a large animal and you've got some sort of situation where the animal's threatening your family or whatever, why would you go at it with this? Why would you put your arm that close to its face when you could be back 6 feet with a blade at the end of a pointed stick? You know, like this knife lashed to a 6-foot long pole. I would put more faith in that for defending me than holding this in my hand, right? So even for self-defense, you know, if you were really scared, let's say you were in some weird situation where you're in your camp and there's like a bear sort of hanging around, you're trying to scare the bear away and it's not going away. I'd be lashing this to a pole as quickly as possible, right? Because now I've got a weapon, right, where I can have away from me. If things coming at me, I've got a chance, right? The things you can do with a spear compare, you know, just go online, look at situations where, you know, knife versus sword versus spear. There's a number of simulations people have done with that situation. Spear guy wins 90% of the time, right? The spear is a good solution, right? That's why Neanderthals and various sort of pre-Homo sapien hominids used the spear. It's a versatile defense weapon. It's a great defense weapon. It's better than a knife, right? Anyway, so yeah, the idea that you're choosing this because it's good for fighting or defense or so on and so forth, that is the most ridiculous angle to come at, in my opinion. You're just not in that, to me, you're not in that kind of danger out here. Anyway, just a few ponderings about the age-old debate. Big knife, small knife. For me, and I can only speak to the context I'm in, you know, Canadian forest sort of situation, northern woods. And I would say it really doesn't depend on the time of year either. It's not like in the summer I start using big knives. All year, if I'm in the woods, I've got something like this, right? For me, the small knife is the more versatile knife. It does the most things the best. Does not do everything. And there's some things that a large knife does better than this. But I would say most of the things you need a knife for are done better by a knife this size. 4-finger long blade, you know, palm size handle. So you're getting more knife out of your knife, right? If you have a knife that can do a bunch of things and is also good for chopping and splitting and slashing, sure, but I think you're going to give up a lot to get that. You're going to give up a lot of essential functionality to get that. And I mean, if you want a chopping tool, use one of these. Bring one of the, you know, this is a chopping tool. This is really good for chopping, right? You know, for me, the combination of the folding saw, a folding saw with a blade about this long, I don't have it on me today, but a folding saw with, you know, like a Silky Gumboy 210, basically. It's got a blade about a handspan long. Folding saw in combination with one of these gives you so much more options than a big, heavy, badass looking knife. It's just a better tool combination. And why can't you bring 2 things? Why can't you bring 3 things, right? You're not going to be just in the woods with one thing. You're going to have lots of things with you. So it doesn't make any sense to think about, what if you only had one thing and that was the only thing you had and you had to survive using that one thing? It's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to think about. It's a ridiculous scenario. It would only happen if you went into the woods like that, if you plan for it. Like if you're going to make a movie about it, or you're doing a special, or you know what I mean. So it's just a ridiculous contingency. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Until next time, enjoy the outdoors on the cheap. Thanks for watching.